Hello comrades, in today's video I'm going to be talking about soldiers who serve capitalist countries, more specifically the soldiers who serve the imperialist countries. So I'm talking about mainly the Western countries now, so like the UK, the US, Canada, all of those countries. If you're not really that political, or if you're an interested and curious right-winger, I guess you could watch this. However, and this is a big however, because I must stress that this video is primarily for communists and anti-imperialists. Therefore, if you are not so well versed in the politics and the science of Marxism-Leninism and anti-imperialism, then you would probably have a pretty difficult time understanding what exactly this video is about. I'm also going to throw in some elements of my personal life here, because when I was growing up, my dad was in the British Army and he was constantly being posted everywhere to fight imperialist wars, and this is what kind of influenced my opposition to the militaries of the imperialist countries. But that was just when I managed to combine my personal experiences in life with my studying of Marxism-Leninism that I've been doing over the years. This studying of Marxism-Leninism that I've been doing over the years, combined with my personal experiences in life with my dad being sent to Iraq, Afghanistan and all those places, this has kind of made me come to the final conclusion of I don't support the troops, and I can use my experience of growing up in a military family, more specifically an imperialist one, to kind of back myself up a lot more too, while still keeping to a materialist perspective to explain my position. Now and again, when I'm scrolling through my personal Facebook newsfeed like a total normie, just to see what my friends are up to and stuff like that, I often come across posts from my right-wing relatives about how we should support our troops. And sometimes I see the slightly strange post where some right-wingers preach that all young people should be made to join the national service, which came about in the 1940s here in the UK, and it was stopped in 1960. This was basically a youth branch of the British Army which recruited physically fit men between the ages of 17 and 21 for an 18-month-long service, which would then be followed by them remaining as reserves in the military. Now, when I see these posts on Facebook, I normally just ignore them and continue to scroll through my newsfeed, because I know that many of them are probably just a bunch of Karens having a hissy fit because it's one of those all young people should join the national service, share if you agree posts. I never usually argue with them because they are purely emotional posts which are not really backed up by any sort of objective, observable or historical facts. So arguing with these people would kind of be a waste of my time. In today's video, however, I am going to be exploring the minds of these right-wing boneheads, as I personally like to call them, so you don't have to.
Hello sir, and why are you here today?
I'm here to protest, right? So I'm going on a march because I want Britain to be back British. I want Britain to be back British. We've got interracial law, and the Muslimic infidel. They're trying to get their law over our country.
Some of these Burqa people, right, they can't even speak proper England.
I've not been groomed in public speaking, or I've not been educated.
I've never read a book! I don't even know how to use a spoon! What a role model.
People often ask me, hey Reese, why don't you support our troops? Well, that's a pretty vague question in itself, because what do they specifically mean by supporting the troops? Do I support the troops being sent to bomb, invade and slaughter in another country because the giant multinational corporations want to take over their markets, resources and politics of that said country in order to carry out economic exploitation? No, I don't. The troops are being sent by the ruling class to engage in horrible atrocities which can only be described as, well, genocide. And they do this so that huge investors can take in giant profits. So if this is what the question is implying, then no, I don't support the troops, because they don't have any business in another country that they've been sent to on behalf of corporations for oil and other minerals. But instead, I stand with anti-imperialist forces who fight against the imperialist soldiers, violently if necessary, in their struggles for national liberation, to preserve the development path that they've established for their people, free from big capitalists who would otherwise be looting their countries and stealing their wealth. Now, my dad is actually ex-military himself, and even though my dad is quite right-wing, I do have some pretty interesting conversations with him when it comes to history and politics. What's pretty interesting is that even though my dad is quite reactionary, he does actually see where I'm coming from on many issues. But in particular, one of the reasons why I'm quite close to my dad, maybe not politically but definitely personally, is because we both love military history. Now I remember very well when I was just a small boy, my dad was sent to Iraq by Tony Blair. It was at this time when people were protesting outside the gates of Parliament in Westminster against the war, but they were still ignored. There was no evidence that Saddam Hussein had any weapons of mass destruction, and yes, that's the justification that the US and Britain used to invade and bomb Iraq. Very hypocritical, don't you think? Two imperialist powers who possess some of the largest arsenals of weapons of mass destruction are telling countries that are literally victims of imperialism that they cannot build nukes as a deterrent to the West. The only reason why the US hasn't invaded the DPRK and Iran yet is because the DPRK and Iran are putting up their defenses. And rightly so. North Korea and Iran actually understand what would happen if they gave away any slack. The Americans would crush them. This is why North Korea and Iran are so damn militarized, and it's also why they are just armed to the fucking teeth, because the threat from the USA is just so high. In the case of Iraq, they were crushed because they didn't have that deterrence. When my dad was in the army, he was also sent to Afghanistan when I was a kid too, which put me and my family through some very hard times, I can tell you now. I even remember my mum telling me that when my dad was in Afghanistan, my grandmother took me to the fish and chips cafe in my local town just to try and cheer me up, and basically that didn't work because, you know, as a kid you're missing your dad, aren't you? And I also remember hearing the story from my mum that my dad actually missed my first birthday because he was in Bosnia just after the dissolution of Yugoslavia, and that was another hard time. It is this personal experience of mine that also puts me in favour of workers showing opposition to imperialist wars by coming together and standing against the troops being sent to fight wars for plunder, not only because the soldiers themselves are, in the grand scheme of things, no different from any other working class person, but because they form a part of the state machine, which is the first line of defence in front of the ruling class. The military is essentially the state, and so are the police and the politicians. Under capitalism, the state, it serves the capitalists. It doesn't serve the workers. That's why capitalism has to be overthrown, and that's why I don't support the troops. A few months back, I openly criticised the British Armed Forces in front of my family, and you might laugh at this, but when your family is so right-wing and so reactionary, and when you're the only Marxist-Leninist, that's not an easy thing to do. In response to this, and I remember it very well because my mum then said to me in a very McCarthyist way, "Well, aren't you proud of what your dad's done?" It's the same logic of, don't you think the British Army is the best in the world and that it's wrong to criticise it in any conceivable way? Which then later boils down to the old ridiculous question of, are you a commie or a patriot? It's basically a fucking McCarthyist worldview. I'll say it honestly, and I will be brutally honest, even though my dad served in the British Army for 24 years, am I proud of what he did? No. I'm not proud of what he did at all. It might be kind of sad to say that because he is still my dad, but the only thing I will be proud of him for is actually leaving the British Army. As an imperialist soldier, he wasn't serving the interests of the ordinary people here in my country, and he most definitely wasn't serving the interests of the people in the countries that he was posted to either. Of course, he may have been told to think that he was serving his country and his people, but he really wasn't. The British Army currently only exists to serve the bourgeoisie and the aristocracy. They only serve the multinational corporations so that they are able to basically steal resources from other countries, and they serve the aristocracy to further enrich them as well. When I tell people this and try to show them what the British Armed Forces are all about, they would often tell me, "Well, Reese, they had a job to do. They were only following orders." To that I merely respond with the question, haven't you heard of something called a mutiny, or alternatively a resignation, or even desertion? The Cossacks did this in Russia when they sided with the Bolsheviks against the Tsar and Kerensky's government. British soldiers during World War I began mutinies, and there were cases of Wehrmacht soldiers from Nazi Germany defecting to the Red Army in World War II and helping the partisans fight the Nazis. Some German soldiers even teamed up to try and kill Hitler. So, you know, Don't try and hide behind this blanket of, oh, they had a job to do. If they truly knew it wasn't right, and if they honestly didn't agree to it, then why the fuck did they not stand up against it, or at least try to do something to protest against it, like hand in a resignation, or alternatively, even merely question their superiors? I would even go as far as to ask why they chose to join the fucking army in the first place. The best answer here is that they were misled by the imperialist propaganda, and then continued to have their minds poisoned by this imperialist propaganda when they entered the military. So pulling the duty card to give yourself a nice little justification, I'm sorry, but it makes you a fucking coward. If you are ordered to do something and you don't agree with it, or you don't think it's right, standing against that and even merely questioning your superiors is something that well and truly takes balls and a shitload of courage to do. That shit isn't easy. And there is far more valor in that than pulling the duty card. So don't give me this right-wing bullshit of, oh, I had to do it, it was my duty. There were cases of American soldiers who stood up to the US Army during the Iraq War. I think the name of this particular American soldier, well, I say American soldier, but an American intelligence officer who was working alongside the US military in Iraq. I think her name was Chelsea Manning, who used to be called Bradley Manning, and Chelsea was actually sentenced to 35 years in prison for exposing what the US Army was really doing in Iraq. That just shows the class struggle right there, doesn't it? What Chelsea did was that she basically exposed a lot of the classified US intelligence documents on the Iraq War via WikiLeaks, which is also the reason why Julian Assange is going through the horrible shit that he's going through right now, because he exposed classified US military documents to show the people of the imperialist countries and to tell them, you know, the troops don't fucking fight for you guys. One of the classified US military documents that Chelsea Manning had exposed included some video footage of an American Apache helicopter literally gunning down civilians in Iraq, while the pilots physically lied about the people they were shooting at and the weapons that they had. This was then followed by the helicopter beginning to open fire at a bus full of kids. Luckily, however, there was an American soldier on the ground who helped Chelsea get the children out of the bus. Now, I do have the footage on me here, and I will warn you that it is quite horrible.
It was the video that put WikiLeaks on the map, turned the tide of war in Iraq, and landed Private First Class Bradley Manning in military detention. But for Army veteran Ethan McCord, it was just another day on duty.
The helicopters, they were approximately about 1.5 miles away when they were zooming in on these guys. And from looking at it now, you can't see anything. I mean, that right there is obviously a camera dangling, if you were to really pay attention. That guy has an AK-47 right there.
Baghdad, Iraq. 2007, the 216th Battalion was out patrolling a volatile part of the city.
I was about 4 or 5 blocks away to the left of the screen. This was a battalion-wide mission.
And then the situation turned deadly.
Come on, fire!
We heard the Apaches firing.
Ethan and his infantry squad began running toward the scene to provide support. Again, the Apache helicopter opened fire.
Come on!
When he arrived on the scene, the Apache guns were quiet. The accused enemies were dead.
I just drove over a body. Yeah.
One guy's head the top of his head was completely off, and his brains were on the ground, and the smell still haunts me today. I don't even know how to describe it.
When he approached the van, a noise Ethan wasn't expecting, a cry of a little girl.
I think she was 4 years old, and you could tell she had a wound to the stomach. And I remember her looking at me, and the blood around her eyes made her eyes so ghostly white.
Ethan grabbed the girl and ran into a nearby building. He then picked glass out of her eyes so she could blink and handed her off to a medic.
I went back outside and was told to take pictures, so I started taking pictures at the inside of the van.
And that's when he discovered the little boy.
And that's me.
What's in your arms?
That is a little boy who I originally thought was dead.
Despite their injuries, the children survived. But part of Ethan changed forever that day.
But I couldn't stop myself from crying. I couldn't stop myself from feeling the way that I was feeling.
When he did seek mental help, he says he was mocked by his commanders and threatened with expulsion from the military.
That's when I started drinking. Mental health had given me prescriptions, 13 prescriptions of Geodon, Depakote, Prozac. I mean, I was a zombie.
But things got worse.
I started daydreaming of killing my own children and everybody around me.
So Ethan took matters into his own hands.
I'd already begun drinking pretty heavily, and I downed all the pills, and I drank a fifth of Crown Royal, 10 o'clock in the morning. And my wife at the time found me.
That was the first time Ethan tried to take his own life. After that, he was dismissed from the Army.
I was kicked out with no disability, no benefits from the Army whatsoever.
He returned to Wichita, and then Ethan attempted suicide for a second time.
I actually wrote a poem right before I did it, before I put the gun in my mouth. And I don't know if I really want to talk about it.
Ethan's story is tragic, yes, but he certainly isn't alone. Tens of thousands of military veterans suffer the effects of PTSD long after they leave the battlefield. And for those who simply can't cope with the stress, oftentimes they choose to end their own lives. They're fathers and brothers, sons and soldiers, and now they're simply another casualty in American wars abroad. In the past 2 years alone, Ethan has lost 8 of his veteran brothers to suicide, and his outlook on life hasn't improved with time.
I know that I will never, ever get better. I'll never get over this.
For the world, the Collateral murder video was just another black mark on an unpopular war. For Ethan, it was a catalyst that made him question the entire purpose of the Iraq War.
You know, America, John Wayne, you know, we wear the white hat. Americans are always out. All we're doing is trying to help people. That's all we do. We're just trying to spread freedom and democracy through the barrel of a gun.
History will be the ultimate determinant of how the Iraq War is viewed. But for Ethan and so many soldiers suffering from post-war stress, the future is far and the past is too much to cope with. Reporting from Wichita, Kansas, Megan Lopez, RT.
Chelsea Manning was one of the people who decided to stand against the war and put this out for everyone to see. People who do that, you know, people who are literally carrying out the dirty work of the bourgeoisie, to then stand up against that, to stand up against imperialism from within the belly of it. They are the heroes. Chelsea Manning didn't just sit there and watch this Apache helicopter gun down civilians and then pass it off as the pilots following orders, because she had access to all of the documents proving that the Iraq War was waged over a lie, just to enable giant multinational corporations to get their grubby hands on the oil reserves and the markets there. Now I'll say it again. People like Chelsea Manning are the real heroes, not the imperialist soldiers who were awarded a medal for being collectively responsible for massacring, displacing and murdering entire populations because wealthy capitalists saw it as a last resort to exploit the labour and the markets there to essentially rob these people of their wealth. The imperialist soldiers who were rewarded by the British royal family for butchering Republicans in Ireland, for crushing anti-colonial uprisings in Africa, for setting up internment camps and crushing communist guerrillas in Malaysia. They're not heroes. Wake up. The troops, they don't fight for us at all. They fight for the ruling class. At the moment, I'm really just expecting to see lots of right-wingers in the comment section going on about how unpatriotic I am. But I am going to be doing a video on proletarian culture very soon. So I'll cover why, even though I find it hard to find things about the UK and the West as a whole that I like, there are definitely some elements which are there that can be promoted under socialism. On the other side of the coin, if the question of supporting the troops is implying that we should help the veterans, specifically ex-soldiers, meaning giving them the psychological and the physical treatment that they need for things like PTSD or physical wounds, which I highly doubt that's what the question of supporting the troops actually is about, then yes, I wholeheartedly support that, because I'm sure that the imperialist soldiers being sent to fight wars for plunder have seen or done horrible things that have well and truly fucked them up. So in that case, yes, I do support helping ex-soldiers, so people who have left the army and are in need of psychological or physical treatment, if this is what the support our troops question is implying. Yet, I really do beg to differ, because judging by a lot of right-wingers who support the imperialist soldiers, this is really not the case at all. Keep in mind that these are the same right-wingers who constantly complain about refugees while unconditionally supporting imperialist troops being sent to the Middle East on behalf of the capitalists, because according to them, that's the patriotic thing to do. Yeah. I'll let you have a think about that one for a second. The reason why the refugees are coming here is because their countries are being bombed by the imperialist troops that the right-wingers who are complaining about the refugees are supporting. So yeah, I will let you have a think about that for a second, because if you've got a problem with refugees, you need to look further, mate, because it's not the refugees causing the problems. The refugees exist because the wars have made them flee their country. You know, if your country was getting bombed, what's the first thing that you would do? A big reason for my position on helping veterans is because I remember seeing my dad go through PTSD after coming home from Iraq, and that wasn't nice at all. Now, even though I support giving help to veterans, specifically psychological and physical treatment, it's not because I'm proud of what they've done, because I'm really not a big fan of the British Armed Forces at all, or the armies of any imperialist countries for that matter. You've probably seen a few of my posts on Facebook, on MeWe, or even here on YouTube to know this already, due to the Marxist-Leninist political, economic, and sociological theory which I'm subscribed to. Deep down, the soldiers themselves are generally no different from any other working class person, but it's the side that they're on which is the biggest factor here. So the main reason why I support giving psychological and physical treatment to veterans, it is because it's just the human thing to do. Going through PTSD or having any missing limbs, it's not a laugh, it's not a nice life at all. As well as this, I am in favour of educating ex-imperialist soldiers, since many of them do hold extremely reactionary views, just like many of the ordinary workers in the imperialist countries do. And this is why workers' revolutions, specifically communist revolutions, they're led by something called a vanguard, which consists of the most politically conscious, the most politically active, the most class conscious, and the most experienced revolutionaries to actually lead the working class by educating them while also learning from them at the same time. This is really to get an idea of the material conditions that they face and apply Marxist-Leninist theory to those conditions. Basically, when it comes to the situation of the ex-soldiers, they'd really need to be shown how they were not fighting for their country, because they were just told by their superiors and the ruling class in general that they were doing good for their country. In reality, they were actually fighting for a small minority of rich parasites who make up the ruling class, who control politics and start wars to get even richer. What also must be addressed is that the military under this current capitalist system is a barrier to a workers' revolution. The French bourgeoisie sending in the troops to crush the Paris Commune in 1871, or British soldiers being sent by Winston Churchill to Tonopandi to crush striking miners in 1910, or the Tsarist monarchy sending the Cossacks to shoot down the peaceful Bolshevik protesters during the July days of 1917, or even more recently, US President Donald Trump threatening to send the US military alongside the National Guard to crush the Black Lives Matter protests. These are all examples of why the military and how the military is a barrier to the workers' revolution. Under capitalism, the military are not on the side of the working class at all. People always get cold feet on this subject, so this is also the reason why I'm doing this video. The only time that the armed forces would be on the side of the working people will be under socialism, with the dictatorship of the proletariat in place. After a socialist revolution and after the overthrow of capitalism, the struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat is going to be fucking intense. The Paris Commune has shown this. The Bolshevik Revolution has shown this. The Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela has shown this. The US-backed fascist coups in Chile and Bolivia have shown this. The US embargoes on Cuba, combined with the failed American invasion of the Bay of Pigs, have shown this, etc., etc. Overthrowing capitalism, newsflash, it's not easy. It's a really hard thing to do, and it can't be done overnight because you have to educate the masses. You have to also learn from the masses. You have to befriend the masses. You have to build up a massive movement for the workers and by the workers, and there must be a disciplined organization too. There is also the struggle against reactionaries who would steer the organization in the wrong direction to consider as well. Even after the successful overthrow of capitalism, even though the capitalists you have managed to overthrow may have fled the country, or maybe they have surrendered to you, or you had to kill them, well, that capitalist class is going to have the support from capitalists in other countries. So, to put it more frankly, they're basically going to try and fuck you up, man. Due to this, you may end up having a civil war on your hands. What I mean by a civil war is a class war, and this is not really a bad thing, because that is the right path to take if the condition presents itself. The civil war that happened in Russia just after the Bolshevik Revolution, it was a class war because you had the white armies, which were basically the monarchists who were with the Tsar, and you also had the Mensheviks, and you also had the forces of all the imperialist powers like the UK, Japan, the US, France, etc. Then on the opposite side, you had the Red Army, which was, well, you must know what the Red Army is. They were communists. This is why the dictatorship of the proletariat, which is where the working class essentially controls the government, controls politics, controls the workplaces, and therefore controls society, is the way forward. An example of the dictatorship of the proletariat was seen in the Soviet Union, where there were workers' councils, which were called Soviets, and these workers' councils would basically be run by elected representatives who would listen to and act on the views and concerns of workers. If the workers felt as though their interests were not being represented, they could actually replace that representative with another one, because that's what you can do in a democracy. You can vote bad people out. There was also the collective ownership over the means of production, where the workers essentially had the democratic control over their workplaces and could decide collectively what happens with the profits that they make. They would basically decide collectively whether they want to invest in better equipment for the company, or if they were going to put it towards the society as a whole for things like infrastructure. So basically, the means of production under socialism are not there just to be profitable. They're there to help people. The only reason why the Soviet government, the police, the military, and the penal system were there was to basically stamp out any acts of sabotage or imperialist invasions. They were there to fight reactionaries. This is the meaning behind the term dictatorship of the proletariat. It is the dictatorship of the workers over the capitalists. The reason why this happens is because after a revolution, things don't just magically get better. Basically, I'll say it again, overthrowing capitalism is not easy. And even when you've successfully overthrown capitalism in your own country, you're gonna have capitalists from other countries trying to stop you from constructing socialism and making your way towards communism. I know I've gone a bit off topic here, but I think that just had to be explained. So I'll get back to the topic of the imperialist soldiers, because there is one more thing I need to cover before I forget, and just before I end the video. I also see right-wing boneheads go on about how I should be thankful for the soldiers who gave their lives for mine because I can enjoy the freedoms that I have right now. This is a complete non sequitur in itself, and it also sounds like an ad hominem. A non sequitur is an answer to an argument that really doesn't make sense, and an ad hominem is when your opponent basically attacks you as an individual instead of actually breaking down your argument. I remember having an argument with my uncle about this subject about a year ago, and he is literally a prime example of a right-wing bonehead, because where he was going on about how I should support the British Army because they've somehow saved us all, I had to literally educate him on the history of British colonialism. To that, he merely responded with how all young people just whinge and play video games all day, which was an ad hominem. It was clear that he just couldn't debate the issue. So in the end, I went, you know what, just fuck off. So basically, you will very often hear right-wingers telling you that you should unconditionally support the troops, even though they don't actually fight for you, but rather for the interests of the ruling class, which under this current mode of production are the capitalists. In response to this, you can actually use historical evidence to back yourself up here, because if you really look at it, it was actually ordinary working people who fought against and stood up to the government that earned us the rights that we enjoy these days. Ordinary people who formed unions, who organized, who went out on strikes, and many died actually doing that because they often ended up getting fucking gunned down by the oh so glorious armed forces. These are the people who I respect, who I am thankful to, and who I consider to be the heroes, not the fucking troops. The troops haven't fought for my rights. Workers did that. The troops don't fight the government, they serve them. Wake up. There was also the fact that after World War II, not only were unions becoming strong, but the Soviet Union was becoming powerful too, and that made the capitalists fucking shit themselves, because not only did the Red Army and its Warsaw Pact allies have the military strength which literally rivaled that of NATO, but the Soviet Union was also lending support to national liberation movements all across the Third World, which were previously under the tyrannical rule of European and Japanese colonialism. But now, with the Soviet Union gone and the communist movement in general being really demoralized because of that, the bourgeoisie now feel as though they can kick the boot in. This is why we're seeing wars ravaging the southern hemisphere, the imperialist super exploitation of the Third World, and the very harsh austerity policies here at home. So basically, in order to preserve the rights we enjoy now, we have to do what our brothers and sisters did and stand up to the ruling class again, not support the troops. The imperialist soldiers are a barrier to revolution. Period. The only time they wouldn't be is if the condition presents itself for a mutiny within the imperialist armed forces in solidarity with the working people. The people who the imperialist soldiers are fighting and who the imperialist soldiers are killing, they're not a threat to our freedom, like the establishment and even the troops themselves would have us believe. I oppose imperialist wars, so why should I support the troops who are actually doing these imperialist wars and fighting them? The establishment here at home, who ensure that the wages of workers are kept stagnant, or even ensure that the wages of workers get cut, they're a threat to my freedom. The establishment could very well scrap trade union rights to ensure massive profits for capitalists. They're a threat to my freedom. The police officers who come along to throw tear gas at you and whack the shit out of you with riot shields because you started a peaceful protest, they're a threat to my freedom. The troops don't fight for me. They do not fight for you, and they do not fight for the working class. The people who the troops are fighting are no different from us, and they are no threat to us at all. They just stand in the way of the capitalists who seek to invest in and exploit the natural resources of their countries, and the fact that they're standing up against imperialism is why the troops get sent in to cause fucking carnage. If you don't believe me, just read the statistics of the 1.2 million people killed in Afghanistan, or the 1 million people killed in Iraq. Then again, if you're the average nationalistic right-winger who unconditionally supports the imperialist soldiers, then you'd be way too busy going full on caps lock in the comment section telling me how I don't deserve to live in the UK because I'm such an unpatriotic little shit, to even take the time to read anything that might inform you. It also wouldn't surprise me if you would be the type of person who would just look the other way when presented with evidence that the wars that the troops fight are under a context that is totally false. Frankly, just say whatever the fuck you want, because it will be a load of reactionary gibberish that won't mean anything other than showing up how much of a fucking idiot you are.